There are stories in the dark that never learn to die. Names buried in the silence, still calling from the night. Down a road where the cold wind moans past the places nobody goes. Every secret leaves a mark. Every shadow knows the dark. The evidence fades. The questions remain, and somewhere in the dark, the story is still calling your name. Monstrous, where the lost ones leave their trace. Monstrous, where the truth wears someone else's face. Murders, mysteries, secrets untold, hauntings hiding in the code. If you listen close enough, you'll hear the monstrous things. Every town has something buried. Every shadow has a name. This is monstrous.
Listener discretion is advised. Monstrous covers true crime, violence, and other unsettling subject matter that may be difficult for some listeners. Hey y'all, I'm Carrie.
I'm Momo.
Welcome back to Monsterinos. I know that was a little different, wasn't it?
You threw me out of
I
whack.
know, I seen the look on your face. Once we're all done, I'll show you how it'll look.
Really
What
heard
it's
about
going to
it?
sound like or whatever. Yeah, because you don't know yet. But yep, intro's different. Trying something little different. It wasn't too bad, I don't think.
Nah.
It'll sound better once it's all put together.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I don't have anything for this week.
Just as if the kids are going back to school,
Yep.
be careful because little ones run out from nowhere. Be safe.
Right, yeah, some kids in some areas are already back in school,
Yeah.
and some go back this week.
Yay! We get the house back.
You're crazy. Okay. So since we don't have anything this week, guys, we're gonna move right into it. It's week 4 of our coverage on the Green River Killer. We have one more week, and then we're moving on to the different things. I promise. It'll be worth it by the time we're done. I swear.
So she says.
It will be. In part 3, more remains were being recovered around the Seattle area. Investigators began to understand that the killer was using secluded wooded areas and returning to familiar dump sites again and again. In part 3, we also talked about more victims, including Lisa Yates, Cheryl Wimes, Colleen Brockman, Mary Sue Bello, Martina Authorley, Carrie Ann Royce, Sandra Major, and Lori Ann Raspotnik. Women and girls whose families waited years, and in some cases decades, to learn what happened to them. We talked about 14-year-old Wendy Stevens, who was known only as Bones 10, until forensic genetic genealogy finally gave her her name back in 2021. As the investigation struggled to find a suspect, Ted Bundy inserted himself into the case from death row, claiming that he could help profile the Green River Killer. But a lot of what Bundy said appeared to be less about helping investigators and more about projecting his own thoughts, behavior, and ego onto a killer who was still out there. By the end of part 3, the task force had more victims, more questions, and still no clear path to the man responsible. And unfortunately, those discoveries were far from over. And that's where we pick up this week in part 4. Numero 4.
I'm listening.
Are you ready? You're just like, I don't know, off in your own little world over there.
I'm listening.
Okay. As the investigation entered its 4th year in 1986, the task force was still no closer to finding out who was doing this. But with the killer so public, what they did have was more victims to discover. They were not done yet. Not by a long shot. So on the night of September 12th of 1983, 19-year-old Tracy Winston had just been released from King County Jail in downtown Seattle. She was there on a loitering charge, and she was walking down Cherry Street when a cab driver that she knew pulled up beside her. Tracy needed a ride to the place that she was going to be staying at in North Seattle and asked the cab driver if he could give her a ride. And he was like, yeah, totally. He said he had a fare to pick up first, really quick, that he was headed in the opposite direction of where she needed to go. Told her he'd be back in like 45 minutes to stay where she was, and he'd come get her and take her where she needed to go safely. But by the time he returned, Tracy was gone. Tracy's path that led to her disappearance was both like and unlike many of the other victims. She'd grown up in a very stable, loving family with parents who adored her and whom she adored back. But when she reached adolescence, Tracy started to rebel in the way that a lot of teenagers do. There were some, complex family dynamics going on. Absolutely nothing abusive or anything like that, though. Just normal teenage things. Just some stuff that families tend to go through. We all have that at one point or another. But for Tracy, from that point on, the relationship she had with her parents, especially her mother, Murdy, was very challenging. When she reached her late teens, Tracy had fallen in love with an older boy whose own sister described him as a con man. He was manipulative, emotionally abusive, and demanding. Tracy's mother recalled that she would do anything he asked, and she was gone all the time, anywhere but home. Of course, the more Tracy's parents tried to keep them apart, the more it drove them together. One day, Tracy ran away and moved in with this older boy. Despite the family's very intense objections to this, it seemed that there really wasn't a lot that they could do to convince her to come back home. The last time the Winstons saw their daughter was Mother's Day of 1983. The visit went well, but Tracy was careful with what she did and didn't tell her parents. Her mother said, I don't know if she was ever prostituting. I can't imagine that this was a regular thing for her. On the night that Tracy was arrested for loitering, she called her parents from jail and told them what happened. But she begged them not to come pick her up. And she said it was because, quote, I don't want you to see me in here, not like this. When 3 months had passed without any word, her mother reported her missing. She said, I knew it was going to be bad. I wouldn't accept it in my heart, but I knew. What Murdy Winston didn't know was how long it would take before she would actually get answers to the mystery of her daughter's disappearance. On March 27th, 1986, Tracy's skeletal remains were discovered in Cottonwood Grove Park, which is not far from the Green River. It appeared to investigators that the remains had been placed in the park, but animals had clearly scattered them around the area. But her skull was missing. Although Tracy was on the task force list of missing women, her remains would go unidentified until 1989. So 13 years until they figured out who she was.
I couldn't imagine what those parents went through.
Yeah. There's like, I don't even know if you could put words to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This was whenever the DNA technology had finally made it possible for investigators to conclusively identify her. Wildly, Tracy's skull remained missing until the fall of 2005. It was found when a hiker in a wooded area off Highway 18 near Issaquah, which is southeast of Seattle, which this was also a place where Ted Bundy used to dump his victims, discovered her skull. Now, the discovery of it so long after they had already found other bits of remains is still kind of a mystery because there were no other bones found in the area or any indication of how it even got there.
That's weird.
Yeah. So Detective Tony McNabb told a reporter in 2005, our assumption is that a hiker or a hunter found it and for whatever reason didn't want to call the police and set it alongside the dirt road so someone else could report it. It's quite some distance from any area where we found any other remains. That seems a little far-fetched for me, but we've seen stranger things. Now, including Tracy Winston, only three other victims were discovered in 1986, all in the spring and summer. On May 2nd, a little over a month after Tracy's remains were found, an employee of Echo Glen Children's Center was searching around Highway 18 for a runaway teenager when they come upon various human bones that appeared as though they had been sitting in the woods off the road for quite a bit of time. These remains turned out to be the incomplete skeleton of Maureen Feeney, a 19-year-old who had went missing on September 23rd of 1983. The autopsy revealed nothing of use to investigators, just like all the other ones. But because of the circumstances, Maureen was added to the list as the 35th Green River victim. And it was because of the location of the discovery and because she was a female. That's really the only reason why she was added to the list. Maureen Feeney turned out to be one of the atypical victims in that she wasn't involved in sex work or any other type of employment that would have really put her in a very accessible situation to the Green River Killer. That being said, she had grown up with very low self esteem, and she did struggle with some psychological stuff as a teenager, which might have made her a little bit more psychologically vulnerable to the advances of an older man. In January of 1983, Maureen got a job working with children at the East Side Christian School, and she found a small in law apartment just outside of Bellevue, Washington. Through the job and her newfound independence, Maureen started to flourish and even started socializing. Her confidence was coming up. Unfortunately, though, her life was disrupted in late summer when her landlord informed her that a relative would be moving into the apartment, so she was going to have to leave. The move also meant that she would have to leave her job. Now, that August, she did manage to find a new apartment in Seattle's Central District, and she was able to find a new job at a daycare center nearby it. She had even started dating someone new and was considering moving with her new boyfriend to California. Then, on September 28th, just 1 week before her 20th birthday, Maureen disappeared. When a few days passed and no one had heard from her, her parents reported her missing to the Seattle police. But because she wasn't a fit for the Green River victim profile, she wasn't added to the missing woman's list. 3 years later, her boyfriend came forward and told police that on the evening of September 28th, Maureen told him that she was going out to 7-Eleven. He told detectives, "I fell asleep after she left and didn't wake up until about 11 o'clock that night. She never came back." Now, it's unclear why he waited 3 years to speak to the police, but there's some reason to believe that he may have been pushing her into some more risky behaviors to make money, but it's just kind of speculative. There's no real definitive answer for why he didn't come forward right away. I think he's just a douchebag, in my opinion,
Right.
who waits 3 years to be like, "Oh, by the way, this is what happened the night she went missing." Fucktard. Now, just prior to her disappearance, Maureen's employer noticed, quote, "a notable personality change," and that she went as far as to tell her boss that, quote, she wouldn't be needing a job for very much longer because she was coming into money. Her boyfriend also told detectives that he thought Marin might have been looking for a new job since he found a newspaper want ad section with various exotic dancing job circles and the name Bob written in the margin of the page. Now, according to Maureen's mother, she was, quote, "a proud girl and a proud individual who wanted to stand on her own, but vehemently rejected the idea that her daughter would have considered sex work as a means of supporting herself. Whatever the case, something had put her in the path of the Green River Killer, and she had unfortunately met the same fate as so many others." Now, a month later, just a few miles from where Maureen's remains were discovered, another set of skeletal remains were found in the woods. Using dental records that had been collected by the task force, the ME was able to identify them as those of Kimberly Nelson, also known as Tina Nelson or Star Nelson. Kimberly grew up in Ann Arbor, but after dropping out of high school in the 11th grade, she made her way to Seattle. By 1983, she was the sole financial support for her pimp/boyfriend. Yeah. In October 1983, Kimberly was picked up on a prostitution charge and served a short sentence in the King County Jail and was then released on the afternoon of October 31st. The last person to see her was her friend Paige, who told police that she saw Kimberly getting into a red pickup truck with a white man with dark hair. She said Star wasn't afraid of anyone. She would get into a car with anyone. She was so confident that she could take care of herself. Assuming Kimberly disappeared and was likely killed on October 31st, that meant that she went missing less than a full day after Missy Plager disappeared.
Damn.
Yeah. A few days later, Paige was working out by the strip when the man in the red pickup truck pulled up beside her. And I guess he said, "Didn't you hang out with that tall blonde girl?" And she said that the question felt very menacing, like something didn't seem right about it. She said she was immediately freaked out by him. The man offered her money to get into the truck with him, but she said, "No, thank you. All set." She's like, "No, bitch, get the fuck away from me.
No shit.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't need money that fucking bad." It's awful. That's probably what she's saying in her head, but she's like politely like, "No, thank you."
Right.
She reported Kimberly missing and gave the description of the man to the police. So Paige had been the one to report her missing, and she gave the man's description, but nothing ever came of it. And the next time anyone would see Kimberly Nelson, she was just a little more than bones carelessly thrown in the woods by the side of the highway. More than a year would pass without any new victims or discoveries of old ones. Then, on June 27th, 1987, the task force was presented with both. That afternoon, the remains of 17-year-old Cindy Smith, who worked as an exotic dancer, were found in a wooded area just off Highway 18 in Auburn. Cindy lived on and off with her parents in a suburb of Tacoma, but she frequently hitchhiked back and forth to any of the places that she performed in. So, like, the different clubs. When she failed to return home on March 21st, 1984, they reported her missing, and Cindy's name was then added to the list. If the date that she went missing can serve as the same date as her death, as it has been in just about every single case, that made Cindy Smith the most recent Green River victim, having been killed 6 weeks after the murder of Mary West. Now, during this period in September 1987, so just a few months after Cindy Smith's remains were found, the FBI issued another major update to their profile of the Green River killer. So, this is like what? The third profile they've put out on him? By this point, human remains linked to the killer had been discovered across state lines near Portland, Oregon, which elevated the investigation to a federal major case. Because the killer had been actively murdering and evading law enforcement for over 5 years, the FBI Major Case Unit did step in to analyze how he was adapting his tactics over time and to help coordinate efforts between police in Washington and Oregon. Obviously, because the FBI profiled this guy several years before this, but because now he's crossed state lines, that changes things in an entirely new way. The updated profile that we have portrayed the killer as a highly mobile, interstate predator operating along major transit routes, especially the I-5 corridor. Profilers predicted that he held a steady, long term blue collar job, likely involving trucks, delivery routes, or commercial painting, which explained his long, unmonitored hours on the road and route access to isolated areas across state lines. Crucially, analysts emphasized that he hid behind a polite, quiet, and ordinary nice guy social mask. Don't they all?
No kidding.
Rather than standing out as creepy or hostile, his unassuming personality allowed him to build a basic trust with vulnerable women and completely avoid raising suspicion among his neighbors, coworkers, or his family. Psychologically, the FBI pointed to a deep-seated hostility toward women, likely originating from childhood abuse. They also issued a stark warning to the task force. The killer was actively monitoring news and media coverage of the investigation. By following public police updates, he derived a twisted sense of control and intellectual superiority, using that information to adapt his methods and stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Following the discovery of her remains, a full year would pass before the next victim was discovered in the late spring of 1988. So those are the remains of Cindy Smith. Sorry, I know that was a little bit confusing there. By this time, so by the late spring of 1988, it wasn't a more recent victim they had found, but instead a very early one. Debra Estes had just celebrated her 15th birthday. You remember we talked about her, I think it was last part. We talked
Yeah.
about how she went missing. When she disappeared on September 20th, 1982, she had grown up. Debra had to grow up pretty fast, and she had already run away from home several times by this point. Each time, it worried her mother sick, of course. One relative said many years later, life was a game to Debra. By July 1982, Debra had run away so many times that her parents stopped reporting it, assuming that it was just no good and she would eventually come home. So that summer, they learned that Debra was spending most of her time with an older friend, a girl named Becky, who had an apartment in the Rainer Vista housing project. They figured that if nothing else, at least Debra had a roof over her head and she was most likely safe. They were, unfortunately, very wrong. By the fall, Debra had started dating an older man who turned out to be a pimp. He and Debra began living out of motels, staying just a few days until they ran out of money and then moved on. The rooms were paid for with the money that Debra made through sex work. But that all came to an end when Debra went missing on September 20th. So basically, Debra was being trafficked. Like let's call it what it is. Basically, what's happening here. And then she disappears. So when her parents had not heard from her for a few days, they decided to report her missing. They explained the situation and that they suspected she might be supporting herself and her older boyfriend through sex work. But each time the officer checked the reports, they found no arrest records for anyone by that name, not for prostitution or anything else. They had no way of knowing that while Deborah had no police record, 15-year-old Betty Lorraine Jones had been picked up for prostitution at least 4 times in the recent months. Had anyone known that Deborah and Betty Jones were the same person, investigators would have at least known where to begin looking for this missing teenager. But things being what they were, there was no way for anyone to cross reference the name or make any connection between the two. In a case full of nothing but tragedy and outrage, the story of Debra Estes is perhaps among the most tragic. Just a few months before she went missing, Deborah had been picked up. This one is this one's gonna get to you. Okay, just gonna put it out there now, guys. Be prepared. I'll give you a few seconds to prepare yourself. Are we ready? Are we prepared?
Yeah.
Okay. A few months before Deborah went missing, she had been picked up on the strip by a white man driving a blue and white truck. What?
See, a lot of those girls, the witnesses tell them about that truck, but they're not.
Well, so the issue
It's
is,
not clicking.
and I'm gonna explain it. It'll get explained part 5.
It figures.
Yep. Part 5, it'll all piece together. A lot of why a lot of these connections aren't being made is because the trucks are different colors.
Oh.
Yes, they are not mistaking the color. The trucks are actually different colors. And it'll all get tied together next week in part 5. Yep. We gotta keep the suspense going, man. Not only that, it's just that's just kinda where it fell in the timeline. Like, I didn't purposely do that. But it does tie together, and it will make sense, I promise. So this man in the blue and white truck that had picked Deborah up on the strip just a few months before had effectively kidnapped her, okay? He kidnapped her at gunpoint. He drove
Damn.
Yeah. He drove her out to the middle of the woods where he sexually assaulted this child, hit her in the face with this gun before tying her up and leaving her in the woods. She managed to untie herself and she ran to the nearest house where the homeowners called police. When they took the report, Deborah described the man and the truck and gave them the fake name that she had been using, Betty. So there's no way of knowing whether the first assault had been committed by the Green River Killer, but the description of the man and the truck fits him to a T. So they had to sit there now and say, had he let Deborah go only to come back and kill her? And it sounds like that might have been the case. It is entirely possible that this happened. That Gary Ridgway didn't even know that she was the same person who he had attacked just a few months before he took her. Because he states himself that he doesn't even remember half of the girls' faces. He said, quote, I don't know most of their names. And then at one point, he says, quote, I didn't care. I don't care about them. So it is fully within the realm of possibility that he picked Deborah up, assaulted her, tied her up, left her out in the woods, and then picked her up again and had no idea who she was. Then you kind of have to wonder, did he change his appearance slightly? Was he driving a different vehicle the second time around? If it was in fact him the first time. Is that why she trusted to get into it? Did he look different? Was his car different? Was he like how much did he age in that time? You know what I mean? Because I would think if she recognized him from the first time, she wouldn't have went with him.
Probably not.
Now, Deborah's name was among the first to go on the task force of missing women. That's how early she was recognized as a victim, even without having her remains. Now, Dave Reichert and Faye Brooks spent weeks interviewing hundreds of people who may have come in contact with her around the time that she went missing, but it all amounted to nothing. Her parents and friends had no information that they could or that the detectives could really use. And then her pimp slash boyfriend denied anything. Like he didn't know anything about her disappearance or her involvement in sex work, telling the investigators, I warned her that being out on the streets was dangerous. But yet you sent her out there to make money to the streets that you say are dangerous. Make that make sense, my guy. Like I don't understand. Your brain does not function like the rest of the world. That's for sure. Now, the mystery into Deborah's Disappearance was finally solved on May 30th of 1988 when a construction crew clearing a field near the Panther Lake Elementary School turned up something unexpected. A worker was digging post holes in the earth when he turned up what appeared to be a large rock. But when he reached down and pulled the object out of the hole, he realized that it was in fact a human skull.
Oh, that's gotta be one of the creepiest feelings.
Yep. And near an elementary school, nonetheless.
Where babies play.
Yep.
That guy was a sick puppy.
Yeah. He just didn't give a fuck. Like,
He obviously.
yeah, he just gave 0 fucks. Now, the discovery caused all the work in the area to obviously come to a complete stop. And the task force, paired with the forensic team, were brought out to remove the remains and search the area for any other victims. A few days later, just as he'd done a few dozen times before, Bill Haglund from the Emmy's office managed to identify the remains through dental records, and they were those of Debra Estes. Now, the last set of remains to be discovered in the 1980s were those of Andrea Childers, who went missing in 1983 at the age of 19. She'd grown up in California, but moved to Seattle in 1983 to live with her mother and stepfather. Her grandmother recalled that she wanted to be a dancer. She says she gave lessons and that she was very good. Andrea arrived in Washington on March 29th, and just 2 weeks later, she was gone. The last time anyone saw her, she was waiting for a bus downtown. So initially, her name was added to the task force of missing women. But then a year later, the Canadian border authorities reported that someone with that name had crossed the border into British Columbia. So based on that, it was assumed that she was alive, and so she was removed from the list. On October 11th, 1989, human remains were discovered out by SeaTac Airport, just a few hundred feet from where the remains of Constance Neon and Kelly Ware's remains were discovered in 1983. Using dental records, the remains were quickly identified as Andrea Childers. She had likely been there the entire time that the task force and search team had combed the lot when the bodies were first discovered in 1983. They just didn't find her. Task force member Bob Evans said, "We walked right over Andrea Childers' body where it was found. I mean, we just didn't even know. We had experts, our top people, even bloodhounds, and they never found her." Yeah. Could you imagine the gut punch that was to them?
No kidding.
By 1980, signs that the killer was still active were becoming fewer and farther between. In the spring, when the weather got warmer, sex workers returned to the streets in larger numbers than before because it kind of felt like the danger was gone. Spokane Police Lieutenant Jim Hill, who had been coordinating closely with the Seattle Task Force on cross state leads, said, "That's disturbing because if this guy's still in town and we have to assume that he is, then there's no reason to think he won't hit again." And he's right. As one of the investigators heavily invested in tracking these cases across Washington, Hill was determined to see it through to the end. The problem was, after nearly a decade of chasing the Green River Killer, law enforcement was no closer to catching him than they had ever been before. In fact, are you ready for this?
I'm
By
listening.
by that by this point in the investigation that we are right now, there were nearly 600 possible suspects. Like, how do you comb through 600 possible killers?
I have no clue.
And not a single one was really compelling more than another. Yeah. Hill said, "We've had people we've paid a lot of attention to, but we wouldn't call them a suspect." Now, to make matters worse for the task force, the election of a new sheriff in King County, James Montgomery, brought a new pair of eyes on the budget and a new set of priorities. Because doesn't it fucking always? In a statement to the press, Montgomery said, this is a quote, okay? Not that he was not real encouraged about the case being resolved. He also further said, quoted, "The longer the case languishes, the less likely we are to resolve it." So he's like, "You ain't found this motherfucker by now. You ain't ever gonna find him." That's what he's saying. Fuck you, sir. So his solution, ready,
I'm
was
listening.
was to reassign several of the task force members to other duties with a plan to reassign them all permanently as soon as possible. So that's what his plan is. Just screw it. You can't find him. So we're done.
We're done.
Yep. Yeah. And in the Dialogue with the Devil documentary on Hulu that I mentioned last week. So if you watch that documentary, you'll hear from Bill Krasik. He was one of the task force members. And he said that they had asked for more money at one point for the task force. So that way they could do more, obviously. And one of the higher ups that are in control of that looked at him and said, and I quote, "Why? It's just a bunch of hookers, isn't it?"
They're still people.
Right.
They're still somebody's children and sisters and
Right. But not only that, these women range from anywhere
babies.
from 14 to, what did I say the oldest one was? 26? Like, these
Babies.
are children and, like, literal children and young women. Like, what the actual fuck is wrong with you? To that, Bill says that he says, "My response was, well, yeah, and they're human beings too. Like, who gives a fuck? They're still people." It's I can't stand. Like, humans just need to do better. Like, as a species all together, we need to do better, okay? Get our shit together, guys. Now, it's clear that the task force members gave a shit. It was the people in the higher up positions that were the ones throwing up the roadblocks. Now, back to what I was saying with this new sheriff coming in,
They need
because,
to be voted out.
yeah, he's like, "Fuck that. You're being moved. If you wanna keep your job, you don't have a choice." Is basically what he told these guys. The remaining members vowed to continue to plug away at this case. They were not being deterred no matter how many members of the task force were reassigned by this massive fucktard, okay? So the cuts continued as this swat waffle of a sheriff said they would, and as spring turned into summer, the Green River Task Force, which was once 40 members strong, was cut down to 4 members and then down to 2, leaving Dave Reichert and Faye Brooks, just the 2 of them. That was in the summer.
Mm.
Then, in September, the task force was disbanded altogether, with the King County Council, the same one that told them this was just a bunch of hookers, citing the significant cost and lack of progress. So they're basically saying, you didn't find anything, so fuck it. Who cares about these women and children that are missing and murdered? Who gives a fuck? You're not doing your job, clearly, so we're just gonna get rid of it. Like, what? You make me want to throat punch you. So the cases were reassigned to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. Then, just as everyone was starting to wonder whether the Green River Killer had indeed moved on, a new body turned up.
Of course.
Yeah. In the late 1980s, Marta Reeves had hit a rough patch in her life, and she turned to cocaine as a means to cope with her depression. In a short time, she developed a very expensive and very tough habit that soon began causing problems in her marriage. And by 1990, she was estranged from her husband and her 4 children, living in a hotel in Seattle's central area and supporting herself through sex work. In early March, she called her husband and asked if he could send her some money, but he explained that he didn't have any to give. And Marta said, "Okay, then I'll have to work all night." And that was the last time that anyone heard from her. In April, Marta's husband received an envelope in the mail, and it just had a local post office as a return address. Inside was her driver's license, which someone had probably, they thought, had just, kind of picked it up and decided to mail it back to the address listed on the address, or I mean, on the license. 6 months later, on September 20th, 1990, mushroom hunters walking in the woods near Highway 410 found skeletal remains and some rotting clothing. It took the medical examiner several months to identify these bones, but in January of 1991, they were identified as Marta Reeves. With As with all the others, Bill Haglin was unable to determine exactly how she died, other than to say it had indeed been a violent death. Despite having been discovered in the same location as several other victims, and the fact that she was kind of in the typical victim profile, Seattle police stated that they didn't think she was a Green River victim, and that would remain the case for many more years. I don't understand how you don't see how she's a victim. Like, I'm gonna need somebody to explain that one to me.
Sorry, I can't. I cannot do it.
Now, the only thing like that I can think of would be the reason is because he hadn't claimed any new victims since 1984, and here it is 1990. That's the only logical reason that I can think of that they wouldn't first be like, "Oh, she's a new victim." You know what I mean? Aside from that, I can't figure it out. So, now in the afternoon of February 7th, 1987, Roberta Hayes was released from police custody in Portland, Oregon, and she was believed to be on her way back to Seattle. Roberta was serving a short sentence on a prostitution charge, and it wasn't the first time. Despite her only being 21 years old, she had been arrested several times in the past. She had a difficult home life growing up, and by the time she was 18, she was supporting herself through sex work. Her difficult history notwithstanding, she made a pretty big effort to stay in touch with her family, and she could always be counted on to show up for her family and her grandparents' house for birthdays, Christmas, things like that. She was always connected, no matter where she was, no matter what was going on. So when they didn't hear from her for an extended period of time, they reported her missing. Now, for some reason, Roberta Hayes never made it onto the task force list of missing women, despite her fitting the victim profile pretty much to a damn T. Regardless, at some point in February of 1987, she crossed paths with this killer, and she met the same unfortunate fate as all the others. Then, on September 11th, 1991, her remains were discovered in the underbrush alongside Highway 410, not far from where several other victims had been discovered in the previous years. As far as the medical examiner could tell, her body had been there since she disappeared, and she had just simply gone unnoticed. It would take almost 2 full years for them to make a positive identification, and that would come in February of 1993. Once again, despite the obvious connections to the Green River case in this one, the local authorities declined to consider Roberta a Green River victim at the time. Regardless of whether they wanted to consider her a victim or not, that's exactly what she was, and her death proved it. Rather than having stopped killing, the Green River killer had merely slowed down his activity, which was a rare thing among serial killers. It's not like they do it all the time. It turned out that there was another victim between 1984 and 1987 that had not yet been found, but that was going to change. Patricia Barczak was 19 years old when she went missing in the fall of 1986. She didn't have a history of sex work, but when she disappeared on October 18th, 1986, she had just completed a culinary course and was on her way to her dream of becoming a pastry chef.
That's good money.
Right. Now, Anne Rule had actually later wrote that most girls her age, Patty could be a little bit gullible when it came to men. Now, according to Rule, just before Patty disappeared, she had been dating a man who told her that he had a very successful and lucrative career, but she found out that he, at the very least, was exaggerating that a lot. Due to his wild exaggeration about his employment and possibly some other relationship stuff, she ended that relationship and took great pains to avoid seeing him, which was kind of a relatively difficult task because he always seemed to just kind of be hanging around. Now, when late October came, Patty hadn't shown up at work for a few days and she hadn't picked up her paycheck. So her mother reported her missing to the Seattle police. Despite not matching the victim profile, her name was added to the task force list. This is where it doesn't make any sense to me. There are women who fit the victim profile, who fit the pattern of women that you have in front of you that you're not adding to the list. But then you have Patty over here who does not match and you add her. Like I don't understand what boxes are we ticking here? Because I don't understand. Now, as years went by and other victims were identified and moved from the missing list to the victim list, Patty's would be Patty's would be one of the last remaining, still there even after the task force was disbanded. On February 3rd, 1993, a survey crew found a human skull along Highway 18 in Auburn, just outside Seattle. Now, at first, the investigators suspected that the skull might belong to Tracy Winston, whose remains had been found in March of 1986 without a skull. You remember her?
Mhm.
But a few days later, the ME would the ME used dental records and found that the remains were those of Patricia Barczak, whose name had recently been published along with the others remaining on the list. So even though she had been on the list for so many years, the local authorities once again declined to identify Patty as a Green River victim. So she was added to the list, right? But then they said she wasn't a victim of the Green River killer.
That's because they didn't know their asses from a hole.
Yeah, it doesn't make any freaking sense. A police captain, Michael Nault, told reporters the killer selected sites where he could revisit and fantasize. This place is not like that at all. Okay. That doesn't mean anything though.
Whatever you say, my guy.
Right. He also said that he was not convinced that this man would kill someone who was not a sex worker, even though he already had. Yeah. So it's
That's because they can't make up their mind what they're fucking
I
doing.
know, they don't it's irritating. So it's a little surprising that Michael Nault would have jumped to such a crazy conclusion, okay? Because we already know that he's killed women that weren't sex workers. And the weirdest part is that Nault had been working on or adjacent to the Green River case for at least a decade. So this is one of the few people that should have known what the fuck he was talking about. Yeah.
That's because they stupid.
Yeah. Now, whether they wanted to add Patty's name to the victim list or not, she was in fact a Green River killer victim. And in my opinion, it's just they didn't want to add her to it because they didn't want to say he was back. That's what I think. They didn't want to acknowledge that he never went away.
He had a good thing going. Why would he go anywhere?
Right. And by the late 1990s, the Green River Killer had started to kind of fade from public memory a little bit. People were just kind of like over it at this point, you know? The task force updates, which were before a regular part of the daily news cycle, went away with the dissolution of the task force in 1990. There hadn't been a discovery of a new victim or remains since the discovery of Patty in 1993. That 5-year silence was enough to make the city of Seattle conclude that after a decade of terror, maybe he just stopped. Or at the very least, they thought maybe he died, which was wishful thinking.
Well,
Now,
yeah.
little is known about the Green River Killer's final victim, 38-year-old Patricia Yellowrobe. Patricia did have a history of arrest for prostitution. And unfortunately, she was also dealing with some substance abuse problems that could be expensive and also put her in dangerous situations to kind of, fund those issues. So she disappeared in January of 1998. And when her family hadn't heard from her for an extended period of time, she was reported missing. On the evening of August 4th, 1998, the owner of All City Wrecking, a construction business in King County, closed up his office and was just taking one more look around the wrecking site as he was closing up, locking the fences, all of that so he could go home. He said that everything was fine. When he returned the following morning, he discovered the body of Patricia Yellowrobe. So she wasn't there the night before. She was that morning. He said that she was just laying outside the fence on the east side of the lot.
Damn.
And he is absolutely sure she was not there the night before. During her autopsy, the ME took swabs and submitted the sample for testing. But the amount of semen that had been found in the sample, which they did find some here, was too low to produce a viable DNA profile. As for the cause of death, the examiner concluded that the cause of death was acute combined opiate and ethanol intoxication.
Damn.
So the circumstances seen in the investigation and post-mortem examination indicate that the manner of death was probably an accident. So the final victim of the Green River Killer wasn't even considered a murder, and she wouldn't be for several years. Yeah. And that only happened when the killer himself identified her as his last victim. Yeah. Now, with 45 known victims and more victims suspected, the Green River Killer would be the most prolific serial killer in American history. A very gruesome and disgusting position that he would hold until 2018. But his notoriety wasn't just because of the number of people that he murdered, but it was his ability to kill undetected for nearly 2 decades, all while quietly and secretively dumping bodies only to move them later in some kind of like weird hide and seek game. Because that's exactly what he would do. He would put his victims in one place and then move them to another. Yeah. How fucked up is that? That's why some of the body parts, some of the bones were in one place while the rest were found in another location. Yeah. Yep. Despite the countless hours invested by the task force members and honestly, like what appeared to be like endless resources put towards this case at the time, investigators never seemed even remotely close to discovering the identity of their killer. Now, at least that's how it appeared. In fact, whether they knew it or not, detectives had been very close to the killer at various times during the entire investigation. But bad communication and a series of just bad luck kept them from making an arrest. And it wasn't until the dawn of the 21st century and the adoption of several new investigative tools and techniques that the identity of the Green River Killer would finally become known. And finally, after 20 years, he would be held accountable. And that's where we're going to end it for today.
It was a sick puppy.
Yep, we're going to leave it on a cliffhanger. But next week, we're going to catch him. I promise. We're going to catch him. We're going to bring it to an end.
Fry him.
Yep, but that's where we're leaving it for today. You'll have to come back next week to the rest of it. Which, if you're this far in, you might as well. I mean, yep, that's it. You got anything?
Nope.
Thoughts? Comments?
Just that he's a sick puppy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's a weirdo. I know I need a nap.
I know. Understand. Oh, and just to be clear, you said Prime. Gary Ridgway is still alive. Just so everybody knows.
Oh,
Yeah, he's not dead.
they should have fried him.
Yep. He's still alive.
They should have fried him. But nobody ever
He's
listened.
like 78. Something like that. He's almost 80. Yep. Anyway, that's all we got, guys. We got one more week. Then we're gonna move on. We're gonna catch this guy, and then we're gonna head into a different part of the darkness. So just one more week. Hang in there. There's not really another way to end this one. You know? Is that it?
All I got.
I thought.
Oh, I got lots of thoughts.
We'll share them. Share them with the class.
It just,
The class wants an insight into your brain.
no, they don't. Trust me on this one. This old brain's got too many thoughts that it could get her in too much trouble.
Was there anything in this one that you didn't know already? Because I know last
There
week
was a lot in there that I didn't
was a
know.
lot in this one.
I didn't realize how sick he really was.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's why this one's so long. Because if you're gonna do it, you got to do it all the way.
Oh, no, that I understand.
Yeah. Because there's a lot that you just don't realize until you like really look. You know what I mean? But yep, that's it. If you don't have nothing else,
Nope, I ain't got
we're
nothing.
gonna go get off of here. All right, guys. Come back next week. We're gonna catch this guy and then move on. Until then, we hope you keep listening and remember to
Watch out for monsters.
don't kill people. And we'll catch y'all next time. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Sugar, you want a cookie?
There's stories in the dark that never learn to die. Names buried in the silence, still calling from the night. Down a road where the cold wind moans, past the places nobody goes. Every secret leaves a mark, every shadow knows the dark. Hear the footsteps count to 3. Something's waiting patiently. Monstrous, where the lost ones leave their trace. Monstrous, where the truth wears someone else's face. From the graveyard to the crime scene, from the legend to the scream. If you listen close enough, you'll hear the monstrous things. Old photographs and a crooked smile, missing pieces mile by mile. A locked door and a midnight call, a whispered name behind the wall. The evidence fades, the questions remain, and somewhere in the dark, the story is still calling your name. Monstrous, where the lost ones leave their trace. Monstrous, where the truth wears someone else's face. Murders, mysteries, secrets untold, hauntings hiding in the cold. If you listen close enough, you'll hear the monstrous things. Every town has something buried. Every shadow has a name.